presentation. I'm just going to talk a little bit from some notes. This panel is about what we can do now and what we can do from the bottom up. I want to talk a little bit about food and agriculture because there is a climate movement, but there is a much larger global movement that's around food sovereignty and local foods. And what I'm basically just going to quickly argue is that if we can join with that movement and combine local foods with awareness about climate change, we can actually make a tremendous contribution to solving the climate problem at the same time as we reconnect urban and rural, rebuild communities, and build food security globally. Now, there are a number of connections, and I'm going to talk in more general terms, but both Niels from the Danish Organic Research Institute and David and Mark are going to give much more concrete examples about urban examples of food and also organic more generally. Land use change, as we know, is one of the major emission sources, and the majority of that land use change is conversion of forests and other natural ecosystems for agriculture. The currently dominant model of agriculture is based on heavy use of inexpensive fossil fuels. It focuses on substituting chemical inputs for natural processes. It plays up the notion of global sort of specialization of different regions and countries and crops, and deregulating trade on the theory that markets will efficiently allocate food around the planet. I'm fond of bananas, and I think that there's a place for long-distance global trade, but this model has now really become a caricature of itself to the extent where it's actually undermining global food security and making serious contributions to climate change. At this point, more than 2/3 of developing countries are net food importers. Over 1 billion people are hungry, and the conversion of new land for agriculture continues at a pace that is going to fry the planet in the next half century, as JP was showing us. Now, there was a major UN coordinated study on what we need to do to feed the planet by 2050 that basically concluded that this business as usual model is no longer an option and that we need to change. They said what we need is small and sustainable. And their main goal was not talking about climate change, it was also talking about food security. But there is a confluence of the concerns of those two priorities. In the United States, we actually did a study looking at the so-called food print, the contribution of the food system to climate change. And one of the important conclusions was that it's not this notion of food miles that produces the biggest footprint. It's actually the production practices. So if you have a feedlot in your backyard, it may be local, but it's not sustainable and it's not climate friendly. And so I think our challenge is really to look seriously at waste and efficiency and greenhouse gases throughout the food system and relocalize, but do it in a way that's smart and climate friendly. In production, a lot of the emissions come, again, from livestock, but also from use of nitrogen, artificial nitrogen fertilizers. But there are serious emissions in the rest of the food system as well, especially from food waste. Globally, we produce about twice as many kilocalories per person per day as we actually need. But half of that gets lost as waste, some of it on the farm, some of it in the inefficiency of feeding grain to animals, but a lot of it in the rest of the food chain, in transport, in processing, in storage. And a lot of that is happening in urban areas. This food waste, especially in the north, gets put into landfills where it creates methane, which is an even more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. And at the same time, because we're wasting so much food, we need to grow more, which means we need to convert more land, which again is a major driver of change. So the system we have now, strangely, involves using artificial fertilizers, which are a significant source of emissions, to produce food, then wasting half of it, and using that wasted food to create another significant source of emissions through methane in landfills. There's something very wrong with this picture. The good news is that this vicious cycle can be turned virtuous, and we can reconnect farmers to eaters, rural to urban, in ways that can return organic matter to the soil. And Niels is going to talk more about that in just a moment. There is a a growing movement worldwide to restore local food systems. In the South, it's movements like Via Campesina talking about food sovereignty and community control over decisions within the food system. In the North, we talk about reconnecting farmers and eaters, but increasingly it's also about low-income and marginalized urban and rural communities also retaking control over their food systems. Our challenge and our opportunity is to make the climate connection to this growing global movement. In the US, it means going beyond local and building an actual infrastructure for climate-friendly local food systems. 150 members of a community-supported agriculture farm driving out to pick up their shares is local, but it's not climate-friendly. And I'm really glad that there are others here who can talk about how that can work in an urban system. So thank you very much. I'll hand it over to Niels from the Danish Organic Research Institute.